Hey everybody, this is the fourth here. And in the previous video, I talked about the idea of using the same reverb on certain sets of sounds in your mix to help glue them together and produce a nice, natural sense of space or atmosphere in your mix. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at a certain technique to help you do that and improve your workflow while doing that. And this technique is to use reverb effects on synth tracks. So this is something I touched on briefly in a previous video in the synth and bus tracks section of this tutorial. So you should already have a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. But essentially the idea is you add a reverb to a synth track, and then you route all of the different sounds that you want to go through that reverb through that synth track. So I'll be taking a look at this using this drum beat. So to really help give this drum beat a nice atmosphere and help it sound a little bit more natural and help fill it out a little bit, I want to add the same reverb to all of these sounds. And so I'm going to rename one of these synth tracks drum reverb. And I'll color it so it stands out. So this is my drum reverb synth track. And if you wanted to, you could use a synth made from one of the other inserts in your mixer. Depending on what exactly you want to do, that's something you'll probably figure out more as you go along. But I tend to use these four synths for reverbs, since I don't really use them for anything else. So I have this labeled, and I just want to add a reverb plugin on it. And I'm going to do the Fruity Convolver, because I've really been liking to use the convolver lately. And I'll just find a nice impulse that sounds like it would be fitting for a drum beat. So I'm just going to grab this bright warm room impulse here, because it's nice and relatively short, so it's not going to wash out the beat or anything, and I think it might sound good for the drums. So I'm just going to do that. And then the last thing I want to do is make sure I turn the dry level all the way down, because I want to make this a wet only reverb so that I'm not, increasing the level of my original sound by routing it through the reverb. So I just taken that dry level down, and now I can start playing around with routing the different sounds through this reverb synth. So you can hear if I just take the kick drum and increase its input into that synth, it starts to have that reverb on it. And so I can set it at a level that I think sounds good. That just depends on my personal tastes and the mix. And then I can move on to, the hi-hats and set it at whatever sounds good. And just, you can see how quick this is compared to if I were to try to, load up the same convolver on each independent track. And it also gives me more control than if I were to put the reverb on the full bus track. Because if I were to put the reverb on the full bus track, I wouldn't be able to fine-tune the individual reverb amounts, which using a synth allows me to do. And so I can just take my time, routing each of these through the reverb and fine-tune it so that it sounds pretty good. And it just really improves your workflow. You can see how quickly I'm doing this. And depending on the reverb plugin you're using, it can also save a decent amount of CPU. And now all of the sounds are routed through that, and you should hear that it has a little bit of a decent sense of atmosphere. It's not going to be too, apparent, because I just wanted a little bit of a subtle reverb on these drums, but it should sound a little bit better than just the dry drums. It helps them sound a little bit more real, a little bit more natural. So you can do this for your drums. You could make a second reverb send if you wanted a really long reverb on atmospheric sounds or synth sounds. Or you could route your synth sounds through the drum reverb if you wanted to. But just using the reverb, the wet only reverb on the synths is just a really fast way to add reverb to the different tracks in your song.